Hi everyone and welcome to the last video about the open Sicilian Taimanov. In this video I'm going to be discussing the most topical line of the moment, which is the move Queen F3 on move 7. Um, what I'm going to suggest is a little bit unorthodox. It's almost a new move. A little history about this line. This line pretty much came up just like last year. When my friend Anish Giri started to play the Taimanov frequently on the highest level, and people liked to play this Queen F3 move against him, and ever since he's had like a ton of games in the following line with H5, which is interesting but not what I'm going to suggest for this series. Uh, I'll leave that to Anish. I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't really understand those positions. And instead of going for something that has already really been tried, like Bishop D6, which is another move that I've played myself against Jan Timman in January 2015. Actually, at the time, I knew that this was not a good move when I played it, but I thought that my opponent maybe wasn't aware of it. The unfortunate thing is that after the moves Long Castle, Bishop E5, which really makes quite a bit of sense for black to put the bishop to E5 when there's no clear F4 ideas coming anytime soon, and now black can follow up with knight E7. I thought for a long time that this was a decent way to play, but it turns out that after either G3 here or the move Queen E2 followed by Queen D2 and then optionally excuse me, G3 followed by F4, things look a little bit unpleasant for black, as he will be forced to take twice on D4, and you can have a look at that, but I'm not a big fan of those positions. I think they're a little bit worse for black, and since I've already come across this idea of Queen E2 in my blitz games, I don't feel particularly confident about more people not knowing about this in the future. So here we are, Queen F3. Black has a lot of options here. Pretty much any move is playable and everything is still very untested, so there's a lot to be discovered in this line, which makes it quite a lot of fun, I think. And since I've been advising you to always keep your pawn on D6 throughout D7 throughout the entire series, I'm gonna go ahead and be a little bit of a troll and say play D6 in this position. The reason I want to suggest D6 is because one of the main ideas for white is to play Queen G3, exchanging the queens when white will try to recapture with his H-pawn, and it turns out that these Sicilian endings are a little bit better when white has activated rook for free and some pressure along that H-file. So D6 is actually a pretty interesting move. Let's just go ahead and look at some of the lines. First of all, I think the most logical move for white here is to castle queenside. The castling queenside, black plays bishop D7. So really everything I've told you before sort of goes out of the window as soon as Queen F3 gets into play. The whole character of the position is totally different. White generally wants to push his g-pawn to g5, so putting the knight on f6 is very provocative. At the same time, because he has this diagonal under control, we have a hard time playing b5 and bishop b7. So we just have to adjust to the situation a little bit and go back to something that resembles a little bit more of a rouser setup, a classical Sicilian setup. However, don't be worried. I really think that black has decent play here. For example, after the move Queen G3, now we can consider playing knight f6 as the g-pawn is no longer running, and follow up with b5. So for example, a sample line I have is bishop d3, b5, f4, and here we have a bit of a problem on g7, but I think black can comfortably play g6 and consider playing bishop g7 on the next move, or bishop e7. And really, I don't think white's setup is all that dangerous. In fact, he has to watch out for b4 in the near future, when knight e2 will be the move he has to play. And if black gets his king into safety, we have our regular plan of pushing the a-pawn and so on. So queen g3 is not that frightening. Another move would be knight takes c6, but also that doesn't make a whole lot of sense after we've played bishop d7, as we can now comfortably recapture with the bishop. After bishop takes g6, g4, b5, g5, it might look like we have a bit of a problem with our development here, but as I said before, knight e7 is still an option. That's why we don't put the knight on f6 too early. And after something like h4, really all standard moves for white, he wants to play h5 and g6 and open up the king side to start some sort of attack there. We can play rook c8, continue with our own plan. Now b4 is already a very annoying threat, as after knight e2, bishop a4, this pawn is suddenly attacked 3 times and pretty much no longer defendable. So after a3, queen b7, now it's just a very exciting position as, okay, white can play h5 here, but black will follow up with a5 and b4, and is by no means worse here in my opinion. So the main move I looked at here is g4. Once again, this is already completely new territory. As far as I remember, long castle knight f6 has been played back in an old game from 2012. So I would almost call d6 a novelty, as the player who played it, I think it was Fedorchuk, played it with a totally different idea that I'm suggesting to you. I have no intention putting my knight on f6 at all. So anyway, bishop d7, g4, b5, and here once again knight takes c6 is possible, but it leads to the same thing more or less. King b1, and here I want to suggest to move b4, immediately annoying this knight on c3. It cannot go to a4 because our bishop is covering that square, and after knight takes d4 white would lose the piece. So knight e2 is what you would have to play, and obviously we don't have any interest in letting white take on c6 and put the next knight to d4, which would solve his problem of this superfluous knight on e2, which doesn't look too good right now. So we're going to play knight e5 here, attacking the queen. Queen g2 seems like the most logical response, and immediately we're going to continue with some sort of attack on the queen side with knight c4, attacking this bishop on e3. Well, the most logical move here would be bishop c1, but I found that after rook c8, black really has very decent play here. For example, c3 is an option to get rid of some of this pressure on the c-pawn. Take into account that here e5 is already quite a serious idea, releasing the defense of the c2 pawn, as the knight on d4 would have to be moved away. So c3, but then a5, and once again I want to follow up with e5 and bishop e6 here, then get my king side into play, and if that goes smoothly I can see some sort of mating attack coming out of this. So I feel really comfortable here as black. I think I have quite a serious attack, whereas once again white does have ideas of some sort of attack here, but it's very slow when my knight's on f6, when it's going to be developed to e7 and potentially g6 or c6. A serious move, however, is the move knight f4, which is not the most beautiful move positionally speaking, but it might be a very strong move because knight takes e3 does exchange our only developed piece, or really well developed piece, and white immediately has ideas of playing e5, and yeah, I'm not sure if it's a good idea to open up the f-file for him. I see that in the long run black is way better with these double pawns, but I just think that on a short term it's too dangerous. So instead I'm going to suggest to move a5 here, which is really once again something that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. My idea is to go something like a4 and b3. On one hand we didn't develop too many pieces, on the other hand white pretty much has to take here and activate our queen a little bit more because, well, this knight is just getting really annoying and it's not entirely clear what he can do playing around that knight. So taking queen takes c4 is pretty much where I stop my analysis. I just think that black has a very healthy position again. I don't see any direct ideas for white to use his lead in development. Once again, I want to play something like knight e7, knight g6 or c6. And if I get my development right, I think I'm just slightly better as black. So really, it's white who has to prove something here, and even though he might not be worse, I feel pretty confident as black. So I think that's really about it for long castle. Knight takes c6 would be the other option here. I suggest you take back with the b pawn, and this is a structure we've seen before. d5 would be my next move if I get the chance. However, probably it's a good idea for white to play queen g3 here. After long castle, it's possible to go long castle, but I just think that it runs into rook b8, and not sure that's the right side of the board for the white king. I I just feel that I will eventually have the opportunity to set up an attack on the queen side, especially with this half open b file. So I think queen g3 followed by bishop e2 and short castle makes the most sense here. So after queen g3, I want to suggest the move knight f6. And here, for example, bishop e2. Once again, if long castle, I always go rook b8. I want to go bishop e7. And this is quite an important move to remember. I can afford to let white play queen takes g7. The reason is that after rook g8, queen h6, rook b8, now attacking this b pawn, white should probably castle queenside as b3 looks very ugly, weakening those dark squares. So long castle, rook g6, queen h4. Now e5 looks like a strong move to me. And even though we're pawn down, actually black is better here since the queen is, strangely enough, sort of trapped on h4. It doesn't have a proper square to go to, and at any moment white has to take into account that I can move my knight and have some sort of discovered attack going on there. A sample line would be bishop g5 trying to get rid of this, but after bishop e6 white now has to deal with the idea of rook takes g5 followed by knight takes e4. Which looks very dangerous. Once again, the white queen is in big danger, and queen g8 check will just be answered with king d7 when the queen will be hanging again. So you can have a look at this in the ebook. You can have a look at this with an engine if you want to. As I said, this is a very topical line. You probably want to be a little bit up to date about this, but this pawn sacrifice is definitely completely correct. So bishop e7, the move that I looked at is short castle. And after short castle we sort of come back to a familiar structure that we've seen in the f4 lines. However, white hasn't played f4 yet. But that doesn't mean we cannot apply our knowledge about that line in this position. After rook ad1, we know that white probably wants to set up some sort of kingside attack again. And that might come from bishop h6 and f4 or f4 immediately. So what I like in this position is to play the move king h8, getting out of the way of this bishop h6 move. And really what I want to do as black is just wait for white to play f4 when I can play d5 and get my regular sort of central play going. One idea that is maybe more realistic now is the moves bishop a5 and bishop a6, exchanging that bishop in the future, compared to the situation where the bishop was on d3 and the queen on e2 in that f4 line, 6th f4 line. So really maybe king h8 looks a bit funny because we could be developing maybe bishop b7 or whatever, but at the same time I'm not sure that's really the square where we want to put the bishop. So I think it's a good idea to make this little waiting move, and here I didn't see a much better move for white than f4. If b3, now we can consider to play bishop b7 anyway. I think eventually white's gonna have to play f4. So let's look at f4 here, now d5. And here another reason why I like the move king h8 is because now white has this bishop d4 idea. And that sort of releases the tension from the center for a second. Most of the time white would have to protect his pawn on e4 or decide to move it up, but which both are favorable circumstances for black obviously. If bishop d3, then a5, bishop a6 would become very tempting. However, this is sort of an annoying situation, and here this is actually the second part of the maneuver of king h8. I have a funny move in mind, which is the move rook g8. As strange as it looks, black is now actually just threatening to take a pawn on e4 and later on supported with f5. So once again white is left with a decision. And I know it looks strange, but at the same time we don't have any weaknesses as black, and our development only will take around 2 moves to be fully completed. So as long as white doesn't have anything direct, we can afford all these maneuvers, especially because our structure in the center is so solid. So here I looked at queen e3. It no longer makes sense for white to keep the pressure on this pawn. Also, I guess bishop d3 is not as tempting as it also runs into c5, c4 eventually. Maybe even directly bishop d3, c5 makes some sense, as we have ideas of playing g takes f6. sometimes, and also ideas of bishop e5 moving the queen in this direction when moves such as c4 check become very annoying. So queen e3 makes some sense, getting some another piece on this diagonal, and obviously defending the pawn on e4. Here I like the move bishop b7. Once again, our idea eventually would be c5 now. And after, for example, bishop b6, queen b8, bishop c5, bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, it might look like white has some nice influence on those dark squares, but really nothing terrible is going on. His idea would be e5 and queen e7 right now after knight d7, but I think after the simple rook e8, the rook has no longer has a function on g8. Black is just doing fine, and after something like e5, knight d7, queen a5, queen d8, the position is roughly equal. So I understand it's a bit of a strange idea, and I did put quite a bit of thought into this line, so I hope you like it. I just had the feeling that it's a nice way for black to play, because especially if white decides to play knight takes c6, b takes c6, we do have a very, very solid structure, and we don't have to rush as much with our development as we maybe should in other lines that we've seen. I'll be curious to see if people will be playing d6. I'm definitely stacked with a few ideas in this line, so I'm definitely want to try out d6. Do have some other ideas ready, so in case this one doesn't work out, I might be back with a new video trying to update you guys. But for the moment, I don't see what's wrong with d6, and I'll be really interested to see if my videos will become some sort of influence in the theoretical discussion going on in this line right now. So that's about it for this video. I hope you guys like my idea. I think it's kind of funny that after all we're playing d6 right away when I've been telling you guys that you should keep the pawn on d7 at all times in most of the lines. However, chess is a dynamic game, and you have to adjust to your opponent's moves, and in this case I think it was a very good idea to go back to something that looks a little bit more like a Richter, Rauser, sort of Sicilian, and even though it's not exactly in the same style, we still see many familiar ideas. So I think you should have no problem understanding the positions that you'll get from playing d6 against the queen f3 line. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the videos.